In the annals of medieval history, few deaths resonate with such grotesque horror as that of Baldwin I, the first Crusader King of Jerusalem. This was no ordinary demise. This was the agonizing unraveling of a conqueror, a man who had wrestled the Holy Land from Muslim dominion with blood and steel, a figure whose name once struck terror into the hearts of his enemies. Hailed across Christendom as a champion of the faith, Baldwin's end arrived not amidst the clash of swords and the glory of battle, but as a putrid, agonizing decay that transformed him into a living testament to mortality before he breathed his last. The year was 1118, and the nascent Crusader States clung to a precarious existence in the Levant. Baldwin I reigned from Jerusalem, a city seized from Islamic control scarcely 19 years prior during the First Crusade. The political chessboard was fraught with peril, a volatile mix of Christian kingdoms carved out by ambitious European nobles vying for power alongside entrenched Muslim factions hungry to reclaim their lost territories. Baldwin's rule had been a constant negotiation, a delicate dance of maintaining European support, governing a largely non-Christian populace, and engaging in near-perpetual warfare. He ascended to the throne through a combination of ruthless pragmatism and unmatched military acumen. Born Baldwin of Boulogne, he had accompanied his brother Godfrey of Bouillon on the First Crusade. Yet, unlike many contemporaries motivated solely by religious fervor, Baldwin possessed a keen, calculating intellect that recognized opportunity amidst the chaos of the Holy Land. He shrewdly secured the county of Edessa before claiming the Jerusalem throne, establishing his reign upon foundations of both fear and respect. His court, a fascinating blend of European aristocracy and seasoned local administrators, bore witness to his adaptability in governing a complex, conquered land. The tragic sequence of events culminating in Baldwin's horrific end began under the guise of a routine military expedition to Egypt. In the spring of 1118, the king launched a campaign intended to extract tribute from the Fatimid Caliphate, a demonstration of his kingdom's ambition and its desperate need for resources. While the expedition unfolded without significant conflict, Baldwin, during the arduous return journey across the Sinai Peninsula, was afflicted by a sudden and virulent illness. Modern historians speculate that he contracted severe dysentery, or a particularly aggressive form of food poisoning, ailments that were tragically common and often fatal in the unsanitary conditions endemic to medieval military campaigns. Initial stomach pains and digestive discomfort rapidly spiraled into something far more sinister. Within days of the illness's onset, Baldwin's condition experienced a terrifyingly swift decline. His abdomen began to swell with unnatural speed, distending far beyond normal proportions as internal infections systematically ravaged his digestive system. The king's complexion shifted, progressing from a sickly pallor to an alarming spectrum of colors as toxins accumulated within his bloodstream. Contemporary chronicles recount a stench so unbearable emanating from his body that even his most loyal servants could scarcely approach his tent without succumbing to violent retching. Sadly, the medical understanding of the 12th century proved woefully inadequate to combat such a catastrophic internal infection. Baldwin's physicians, limited by the rudimentary medical practices of the era, could offer little beyond desperate prayers and ineffectual herbal remedies against the bacterial onslaught consuming the king's internal organs. As the infection intensified, Baldwin's abdomen continued its grotesque expansion, his skin stretching to accommodate the buildup of putrid gases and infectious fluids generated by the decomposing tissue within. The king, once a figure radiating power and authority, was reduced to a bloated, unrecognizable caricature of his former self, barely recognizable as human. The psychological burden placed upon Baldwin's retinue was immense. Seasoned warriors, familiar with the brutal realities of medieval warfare, found themselves emotionally and psychologically overwhelmed by the sight and suffocating odor of their decomposing monarch. Servants resorted to drawing lots to determine who would be forced to venture into the king's malodorous tent. Even then, they could endure only mere minutes before the unbearable stench drove them gasping for air back into the desert air. The king himself tragically remained conscious through much of this ordeal, a prisoner within his own decaying body, acutely aware of his grotesque transformation and the horror he inspired in those surrounding him. As Baldwin's condition inexorably deteriorated, his body began to leak fluids through his skin and natural openings. The mounting internal pressure generated by expanding gases and accumulating toxins sought any available escape route, transforming the once mighty king into a grotesque vessel of corruption that defied the natural order. Contemporary chroniclers, writing with the inherent restraint of their time, still managed to convey the sheer, unadulterated horror of the situation. William of Tyre, writing decades later, chillingly described how the king's tent became uninhabitable, necessitating the construction of barriers made of fabric and incense in a futile attempt to contain the overwhelming stench of decay. The final hours of Baldwin's life brought a mercy welcomed by all involved, when death finally claimed him on April 2, 1118, near the fortress of Al-Arish. His body had become so ravaged by decay that immediate burial proved impossible. The desert's intense heat had drastically accelerated the decomposition process, necessitating that the king's remains be transported with extreme caution to prevent complete dissolution. Yet even in death, Baldwin's body continued to inspire horror. During the burial preparations, the immense pressure from accumulated gases and fluids within his corpse reached a critical point, reportedly causing his body to burst open, unleashing a torrent of putrid matter that shocked even the battle-hardened grave diggers accustomed to the carnage of the battlefield. News of Baldwin's death reverberated throughout the Crusader States and beyond. Here was a king who had seemed invincible, brought low not by the sword of an enemy or political machinations, but by the simple tragic failure of his own mortal body. The manner of his death sparked theological debates among medieval chroniclers, some interpreting it as divine retribution for his harsh treatment of Muslim populations, while others viewed it as a test of faith, which he had ultimately failed. The practical implications proved equally severe, as Baldwin's death without a clear heir ignited a succession crisis that would plague the Kingdom of Jerusalem for years to come. The legacy of Baldwin's horrifying demise extends far beyond the immediate political ramifications. Medieval chroniclers seized upon his death as a potent morality tale, highlighting the transient nature of earthly power and the inescapable democracy of death, which claims king and peasant alike. The detailed accounts of his final days, meticulously preserved in contemporary sources, provide invaluable insights for modern historians into medieval attitudes towards disease, death, and the divine. They serve as stark reminders of the medical helplessness characteristic of the era, where even kings could be reduced to rotting corpses by conditions easily treatable by modern medicine. The narrative of Baldwin I's death also illuminates the broader context of daily life within the Crusader States. These fragile European enclaves in the Middle East faced constant threats not only from military adversaries, but also from diseases and conditions for which they were tragically unprepared. The stifling climate, unfamiliar foods, and inadequate sanitation during military campaigns created fertile ground for the types of infections that ultimately claimed Baldwin's life. His death was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a wider pattern of European mortality in the Levant, where disease frequently proved more lethal than open warfare. From a modern medical standpoint, Baldwin's symptoms align convincingly with a diagnosis of severe gastroenteritis complicated by sepsis and potentially necrotizing fasciitis. The rapid onset, abdominal distension, skin discoloration, and unbearable putrid odor all strongly indicate a massive bacterial infection that overwhelmed his immune defenses. The fact that his body continued to decompose so rapidly even after death suggests that the infection had thoroughly permeated his tissues, essentially initiating the process of decay while he was still alive. While rare, this condition remains a terrifying reality in modern emergency medicine, although it would almost certainly be treatable today with antibiotics and advanced supportive care. The profound psychological impact of witnessing such a death cannot be overstated. For medieval people who understood illness through the prisms of divine will and the balance of bodily humors, Baldwin's condition would have seemed like a monstrous deviation from the natural order. The spectacle of a king literally rotting alive challenged deeply held assumptions about power, dignity, and the intricate relationship between earthly authority and divine favor. The fact that even death offered no respite from Baldwin's indignities, with his body bursting open during burial, only amplified the sense that something profoundly unnatural had occurred. The meticulous documentation of Baldwin's death also reveals the complex dynamic between medieval chroniclers and the events they chronicled. While these writers were often constrained by conventions of royal dignity and religious propriety, the sheer horror of Baldwin's demise compelled them to employ unusually graphic language. The striking contrast between their typically formal style and the visceral descriptions of the king's condition generates a literary tension that makes these accounts particularly compelling to modern readers. These chroniclers were evidently struggling to reconcile their traditional role as court historians with their inescapable duty to record events that defied conventional narrative frameworks. The far-reaching ripple effects of Baldwin's death extended throughout the medieval world. News of the Crusader king's gruesome demise reached Europe through returning pilgrims and merchants, becoming integrated into the broader narrative surrounding the perils and enigmas of the Holy Land. Some interpreted his death as evidence that the crusading enterprise had lost divine favor, while others viewed it as a trial demanding a renewed commitment to the cause. The graphic details of his final days entered into medieval folklore, serving as cautionary tales highlighting pride, mortality, and the finite limits of human power. Baldwin's death also triggered immediate strategic consequences for the Crusader States. His brother and successor, Baldwin II, inherited a kingdom already struggling with the formidable challenges of governing a diverse populace while simultaneously maintaining military readiness against a multitude of enemies. The unsettling manner of Baldwin's death, with its subtle implications of divine displeasure, made it significantly more difficult for his successor to sustain the aura of invincibility that had been so crucial to Crusader military and political dominance. The psychological impact of the king's horrific passing rippled through the ranks of Crusader society, contributing to a burgeoning sense of vulnerability that would plague the kingdom throughout its turbulent existence. The medical mystery surrounding Baldwin's illness continues to intrigue both historians and medical professionals. While the core symptoms are discernible from contemporary accounts, the specific pathogen responsible for his condition remains elusive. Some scholars hypothesize that he may have contracted cholera or another waterborne disease common to the region, while others suggest food poisoning stemming from contaminated provisions during the demanding military campaign. The swift progression and sheer severity of his symptoms suggest a particularly virulent bacterial strain, perhaps one to which his European constitution possessed no prior immunity. The stark contrast between Baldwin's life and death serves as a potent reminder of the inherent fragility of human existence, irrespective of social status or political power. Here was a man who had commanded armies, conquered cities, and profoundly influenced the destiny of nations. Yet he was ultimately vanquished by microscopic organisms that his era could neither detect nor comprehend. The democratizing effect of disease, which reduces kings to the same vulnerable flesh as their subjects, was never more dramatically illustrated than in Baldwin's final, agonizing days. His death brutally stripped away all the superficial trappings of monarchy, revealing the underlying common humanity that informs all political authority. The narrative of Baldwin I's death also underscores the critical importance of primary source documentation in historical research. Without the detailed accounts penned by medieval chroniclers like Fulcher of Chartres and William of Tyre, this extraordinary episode might have vanished from historical record or been reduced to a mere notation of the king's death date. Their willingness to document even the most disturbing aspects of Baldwin's condition provides modern scholars with invaluable insights into medieval medicine, courtly life, and attitudes toward death and disease. These accounts act as windows into a world where the boundary between life and death was often indistinct, and where the powerful could be transformed into objects of horror and pity with startling swiftness. The theological implications of Baldwin's death sparked debate for generations after the event. Medieval Christians struggled to reconcile the king's horrific demise with their understanding of divine justice and the righteousness of the crusading cause. Some interpreted his death as punishment for specific sins, citing his harsh treatment of Muslim civilians or his political machinations against fellow Christians. Others viewed it as a general warning against the corrupting influence of earthly power, arguing that Baldwin had become excessively attached to his temporal authority and had neglected his spiritual obligations. Still, others maintained that his death was simply a test of faith, akin to the trials endured by biblical figures like Job. Baldwin's death also functions as a compelling case study illustrating the limitations of medieval medicine and the inherent dangers of military campaigns in unfamiliar environments. The king's physicians, despite their training in the prevailing medical traditions of their time, proved utterly helpless in the face of his rapidly deteriorating condition. Their reliance on bloodletting, herbal remedies, and desperate prayer proved woefully inadequate against the bacterial infection consuming him from within. This medical helplessness was particularly striking given Baldwin's status as one of the most powerful men in the medieval world, with access to the best medical care his era could provide. The social dynamics surrounding Baldwin's final days reveal significant aspects of medieval court culture and hierarchy. Despite their profound horror at the king's condition, his servants and nobles remained bound by duty and rigid protocol to maintain their attendance, even as the suffocating stench of his decomposing body made their presence almost unbearable. Contemporary accounts depict a complex dance of obligation and revulsion as courtiers struggled to uphold the dignity of kingship while navigating a situation that defied all conventional protocols. The breakdown of normal social relations in the face of such extreme circumstances offers valuable insights into the tensions and contradictions inherent within medieval political structures. The preservation of Baldwin's story across multiple chronicle traditions also emphasizes the value that medieval writers placed on recording extraordinary events, even when those events challenged established narratives about royal power and divine favor. The graphic nature of these accounts was highly unusual for the period, when chroniclers generally maintained a respectful distance from the physical realities of death and disease. The fact that multiple independent sources corroborate the essential details of Baldwin's condition suggests that the event was so profoundly shocking that it transcended normal literary conventions, demanding direct, unflinching documentation. The international ramifications of Baldwin's death extended far beyond the immediate borders of the Crusader States. European nobles contemplating joining future crusades were forced to confront the reality that even successful Crusader kings could meet horrific ends in the Holy Land. The romanticized idealization of crusading that had characterized much of early 12th century literature began to yield to more sober assessments of the substantial risks associated with Eastern campaigns. Baldwin's death became part of a growing body of evidence, suggesting that the Holy Land was a perilous place where European assumptions about warfare, medicine, and divine protection might not hold true. Modern medical analysis of Baldwin's symptoms strongly suggests that he succumbed to a catastrophic infection that overwhelmed his body's natural defenses. The swift onset of abdominal swelling, coupled with the unmistakable putrid odor and progressive skin discoloration, points towards a condition known as necrotizing fasciitis, or a similar aggressive flesh-eating infection. These conditions can progress with terrifying speed, transforming healthy tissue into necrotic matter within a matter of hours or days. The fact that Baldwin remained conscious through much of this ordeal would have amplified the horror, as he remained acutely aware of his body's progressive destruction. The cultural impact of Baldwin's death story extended far beyond its immediate historical context. Medieval preachers employed his demise as a vivid illustration of the vanity of earthly power and the inevitability of divine judgment. Artists and writers drew inspiration from the dramatic contrast between his life as a conquering king and his death as a decaying corpse, creating works that emphasized the universal nature of mortality. The story became an integral part of the broader medieval tradition of memento mori, artistic and literary creations designed to remind viewers of their own mortality and the ephemeral nature of worldly success. The political vacuum resulting from Baldwin's death had lasting consequences for the Crusader States. His brother, Baldwin II, who succeeded him, inherited a kingdom already facing formidable challenges from Muslim military leaders, such as Ilghazi of Mardin and the emerging power of Zengi in Aleppo. The disquieting manner of Baldwin's death, with its subtle overtones of divine displeasure, made it increasingly difficult for his successor to project the aura of invincibility that had been so critical to Crusader military and political success. The psychological impact of the king's gruesome demise reverberated throughout the ranks of Crusader society, contributing to a growing sense of vulnerability that would haunt the kingdom throughout its turbulent history. The scientific aspects of Baldwin's condition continue to fascinate medical historians studying the intersection of disease and historical events. The precise bacterial pathogen responsible for his death will likely remain a mystery, but the documented symptoms provide valuable insights into the kinds of infections prevalent in medieval military campaigns. The rapid progression from initial illness to complete systemic failure suggests an organism with exceptional virulence, potentially exacerbated by the intense stress of military campaigning, inadequate nutrition, and the harsh desert environment where Baldwin's final campaign unfolded. The literary legacy of Baldwin's death extends beyond historical chronicles into the realm of medieval exemplum literature, where his story served as a moral teaching tool. Preachers and moralists leveraged the vivid details of his demise to illustrate points about pride, the transience of earthly power, and the paramount importance of spiritual preparation for death. The graphic nature of the account made it particularly effective as a rhetorical device, as audiences could scarcely forget the haunting image of a mighty king reduced to a putrid, bloated corpse. This literary adaptation of Baldwin's death ensured that his story would be preserved and transmitted across generations, even as the specific historical context of his reign became less familiar to subsequent audiences. The diplomatic fallout from Baldwin's death was also significant, as his demise disrupted carefully constructed alliances and tributary relationships that had been vital to the kingdom's survival strategy. His successors had to rebuild these relationships from a position of perceived weakness, as the manner of the king's death had undermined the image of Crusader invincibility that had been crucial in previous negotiations with Muslim leaders. The story of Baldwin's horrific demise spread rapidly through the networks of merchants, pilgrims, and diplomats connecting the medieval Mediterranean world, becoming integrated into the broader narrative surrounding Crusader fortunes in the Holy Land. The psychological trauma experienced by those who witnessed Baldwin's final days had lasting repercussions on the Crusader court and military leadership. Several contemporary accounts mention the profound difficulty that servants and nobles experienced in approaching the king during his illness, and some historians have suggested that this experience contributed to alterations in court protocols and medical practices in subsequent reigns. The sheer horror of witnessing a king decompose while still alive challenged fundamental assumptions about royal dignity and divine protection, forcing survivors to reconcile their experience with their religious and political convictions. The preservation of multiple detailed accounts of Baldwin's death in diverse chronicle traditions also provides invaluable insights into medieval approaches to historical documentation. The fact that chroniclers felt compelled to record such graphic details, despite the usual conventions of royal dignity, suggests that they recognize the exceptional nature of the event and its significance for understanding the broader context of Crusader history. These accounts represent some of the most vivid medical descriptions to survive from the medieval period, providing modern researchers with rare insights into the progression of severe infections in an era devoid of antibiotics or advanced surgical techniques. The narrative of Baldwin I's death ultimately serves as a powerful reminder of the profound human costs associated with medieval political ambition and the ubiquitous presence of death in medieval society. His transformation from conquering king to rotting corpse within a matter of days exemplifies the precarious nature of life in an era when medical knowledge was limited and infections could spread unchecked through the human body. The graphic details preserved by medieval chroniclers ensure that Baldwin's story continues to shock and captivate modern readers, serving as a poignant bridge between our sanitized contemporary relationship with death and the brutal realities of medieval mortality. The enduring legacy of Baldwin's horrific death extends beyond its immediate historical impact, raising profound questions about power, mortality, and human dignity that resonate even today. His story reminds us that all earthly authority is ultimately temporary, and that death, when it arrives, makes no distinction between king and commoner. The medieval chroniclers who meticulously preserved his story understood this fundamental truth, and their unflinching documentation of his final days serves as a poignant testament to to the democratic nature of human mortality and the ultimate futility of all worldly ambitions when confronted with the inevitable reality of bodily decay and death. So, as we've seen, the gruesome demise of Baldwin I serves as a stark and unforgettable reminder of the fragility of life, regardless of power or status. It's a story that strips away the veneer of kingship to reveal the shared human vulnerability we all possess, a humbling testament to the inescapable dance between ambition and mortality. What are your thoughts on Baldwin's story? Did anything particularly strike you, or perhaps spark a question about medieval life, medicine, or the Crusades? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your perspective and get a discussion going. And if you found this exploration of history's darker corners fascinating, be sure to subscribe. That way, you won't miss out on future deep dives into the captivating, often unsettling stories that history has to offer. Thanks for watching.